Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Combat Carnivore. And if it's your first time, welcome to the Combat Carnivore. Make sure to like and subscribe, where we are trying to heal men and veterans through steak strangles and stoicism. Today, we have Rick Miller with us, who is the brother-in-law of the vegan turned carnivore. Is that correct?
That's absolutely correct. Laura is my sister-in-law.
Yes, and so that was a fantastic interview with Laura. And so, anyway, I found out that you and your wife both have your backgrounds as a dietitian and or a nutritionalist. And so, I wanted to have Rick on the record going. First and foremost, what's the difference between the two? And two, how does somebody in your position find carnivore? Because usually it's like a cult
Mm.
to be plant-based if you're a nutritionalist or your dietitian. And then before we do any of that, can I please get your full introduction for the show and basically how you found carnivore?
Of course, Chad, it's a total pleasure to be on and also to be following my lovely sister-in-law and her amazing journey towards a carnivore diet has had such a profound impact on her health and both physical and mental, which is amazing. So my background's as you mentioned, as a registered dietitian in the UK. I won't be in the UK for very long. I'm actually moving to Spain for various reasons. So that will be my home from now on. But I've been in the nutrition field as a sports nutritionist and clinical dietitian for nearly 20 years. I've worked with athletes up to Olympic level. I've been to several Olympic Games, and I'm currently the lead dietitian at a prestigious London private hospital. And how I came across the carnivore diet is actually quite an interesting story. So basically, I first came across it in 2018 when a very good friend of mine actually was following it himself. And at the time, I believe 2018, there wasn't an awful lot of discussion around the carnivore diet, certainly on social media. And so to me, as a, let's call it a centralized dietitian at the time, practicing some alternative health perspective, but mostly doing a lot of the standard stuff when it comes to nutrition, thought this was really bizarre. Why would my friend be doing this? And it turned out that my friend had been suffering with some really significant health issues for quite a number of years, everything from insomnia to gastrointestinal reflux, allergies, all sorts of problems. And he just hadn't been able to shake it for as long as I'd known him, which was, again, about 20 years. I'd known him an awful long time. And we'd spoken about his health issues and tried some various things. He'd even had surgery at one point to try and resolve these sleep issues, which didn't help. And he said, look, I'm going to give this a go. I'm kind of at my wit's end. And he'd found that the carnivore diet, actually, above everything else that he'd tried, of which he spent thousands and thousands of his hard-earned money on, did the most in terms of everything that he'd seen. He improved his sleep. A lot of the allergy-like symptoms went away. His energy improved. His body composition improved. All the things that I'm sure your audience know about when it comes to carnivore. And that really sparked my interest because up until then, I had obviously been taught in my formal training and also as a lecturer myself. I used to teach dietitians to go into the field at university that you can't eat this way, that you are going to become malnourished and you're going to be lacking in vitamins and minerals and you're not going to be able to go to the toilet and all sorts of other, as I understand, obviously now having re-educated myself, is totally flawed. You can be perfectly fine on a diet like this. And since that time, I have both adopted a carnivore diet myself at times. I do everything that I ask my clients to do. I try it myself to make sure that I can speak from experience what it's like to go through those processes, which includes everything from putting a nasogastric feed down my nostrils to trying diets like carnivore, and also recommending it for all sorts of different conditions, everything from small intestine bacterial overgrowth to mental health concerns, weight management, performance. So it really has a huge amount of utility. And I think much of that extends from the way that human beings basically existed for however long you like to think human beings have existed for, if it's millions of years or thousands of years, depending on your position. Let's call it ancestry. We've eaten meat and it is the food that is most beneficial for us in terms of our health.
So why isn't that taught as a nutritionalist foundation?
Sorry, say that again.
So why is that not taught as the nutritionalist's foundation?
I see. So why is it not in
If
the curriculum for dietitians
Yeah,
and nutritionists?
exactly.
Well, depending on who you ask, you'll get lots of different opinions on this. And I think it's multifactorial. I think some of it is definitely because this information has been lost in transit all over the years. So there are lots of archives in the medical records on nutrition which haven't made it into the general curriculum when it comes to dietitians and nutritionists, which is wrong because we should be looking at everything. But that does explain why, for instance, when I talk to some of my colleagues about carnivore diet, they're like, what? I've never heard of this. This sounds bizarre. Why would you even do this? So it's just not reached people's ears yet. So there is a part of that that's true. The other part is obviously the influence of the pharmaceutical and the food industry, which can't be denied on some of the aspects of the curriculum when it comes to nutrition. So I can speak to that from a professional standpoint. Definitely, when you are practicing as a dietitian, or certainly in the UK, and this is true also in the US, I've spoken to dietitians who are practicing there as well, that the pharmaceutical industry obviously produces medical foods for patients to help them with malnourishment or other conditions. And those companies do have a very strong let's call it working agreement with hospitals to either provide the products, and therefore they're allowed to send representatives to the departments to talk about the research. In the very distant past, they were allowed to put on parties and take doctors and dietitians and whatever to conferences, and probably that still happens in some respects, but certainly it's frowned upon now and it shouldn't be done. But it doesn't really matter because the fact that somebody comes in who's usually a lovely young salesperson who knows a little bit about these products, and they come in and give you a lovely lunch, and they tell you about this product, that alone will have an influence on the clinical decision making of the dietitians or nutritionists in the room. And it doesn't matter if it's a medical company or it's a supplement company. It could be a natural supplement company that's making all sorts of herbal remedies or whatever. This type of influence does affect your thinking. You can't help it because you've seen it, say, a week before, and then you see a patient the next day, and that's going to pop into your mind. And these reps obviously come back time and time and time again. So that definitely plays a role because that is then pushed forward into the curriculum that we must provide these products to patients as a first line defense. And then food isn't always the first line when it comes to treating patients. And it's a real shame because, as you say, it can be hugely beneficial, especially when some individuals I've seen have come to me with long-term conditions, and basically they've tried everything. They've gone down the normal medical establishment route. They've done everything their doctors said. They've been to multiple dietitians. They might have been to multiple other specialists, and they're still not getting better. And they've slipped through the net. They've been lost to the system. And something like carnivore is not even presented to them as an option, and usually find it themselves. And then they're coming to me and saying, what do you think about this? And usually the funniest example was a couple of days ago. I spoke to a gentleman who has said he tried it and he was almost embarrassed to tell me. And I said, look, buddy, it's okay. You know, this is a very useful approach and it might help you in your particular situation. And I think that that's wrong. I genuinely think we should be having an open conversation, talking about the risks, the absolute and near risks, and helping individuals make an informed decision. Because at the moment, they're not. They're getting a kind of a narrow viewpoint on that. And the risk, to my mind, for potentially eating disorders or all these other concerns that usually get thrown around by the media pundits is much more complicated than just putting somebody on a diet. I know this from professional experience working in fields like that, seeing people with very extensive eating disorders, that putting somebody on a diet doesn't necessarily condemn them to an eating disorder. And so when you hear that from dietitian associations, I sort of roll my eyes a little bit and I think, my goodness, it's a lot more complicated than that. Otherwise, you could just take somebody off the diet and they'd be perfectly fine. And we know that doesn't happen. So yeah, it's a long-winded but convoluted problem. And I don't really, unfortunately, have a lot of faith that it will change without word from people like yourself getting the message out.
Yeah, that's the only reason why I'm doing this is because I see the influence, and I was one of the people that you described, and I was going down from doctor to doctor, specialist to specialist, and I just felt trapped and I was suffering for so long. And I studied intensely. I was like, I feel like diet got me into this mess, and I feel like diet can help me get out of this mess. And but what sucks is when you go and you make an intentional decision about your diet, it feels like the dietitians, the nutritionalists, and the Seventh Day Adventists who like started this plant-based movement, they have such a stronghold on the market that when you go and Google or you go and find the research in the literature, that you have to dig through mountains and mountains and mountains of information before you find any sort of truth. So I went on every fad diet that there was, and I saw some ups and some downs, but I never was able to get better until carnivore diet was the one. So it's like, you know, I tried being plant-based, I tried being vegan, I tried being vegetarian, I tried being low histamine, I tried, you know, I mean, I tried like everything. And so anyway, to answer your question, or not answer your question, to respond to your statement, it's like usually people find it themselves. That is a huge disservice to the American population, but to people who are suffering. And so one thing that you said that was very interesting to me, that we kind of look at diet and nutrition as not a primary focus on to get people better. But it's weird. Isn't the father of medicine Hippocrates? And Hippocrates, his main statement is you can't treat somebody unless they're willing to give up the things that are making them sick. But at the same time, we kind of treat everybody when they're sick like, oh, you just have a imbalance, like you have a neurotransmitter imbalance, or you have these genetics, or you have this hereditary trait, or whatever. Like they always tell you that it's you, and that's a problem with you, and there's nothing you can do about it besides the medicine. Well, at the same time, if you go to a veterinarian and your dog has an issue, the first thing they ask you is like, well, what's your dog eating?
Quite. Yeah.
So is this a huge, like, are doctors and nutritionists and dietitians, well, especially doctors, almost omitting a huge aspect of medical intervention by just going straight to medicine?
Yes, indeed. I think you've hit it on the head, really. Medicine today, as it's practiced, is incredibly siloed, which basically means that when you see whoever it is, whether it's your family physician or it's the neurology specialist or gastroenterologist or dietitian, nutritionist, whatever it is, that they're not thinking of the individual as a whole. What they're thinking about is staying within their scope or in their little box, not stepping on anybody's toes, and making the process of getting the patient in and out the door as efficient as possible in order to make sure that their quotient, whether that's in the UK meeting certain requirements or if it's in the US meeting other requirements, is as efficient as possible, because they've been watched by the ivory towers from management saying you're taking too long in clinic with your patients. So they're not really exploring any of these things that you're talking about. So I put the onus of blame both squarely on the clinicians for not trying, because it's possible to do that and to explore these options, but also on the system itself, is that it's completely set up for a pharmaceutical-based solution, because it's so much faster. If you think about it, as you just said, it's so much faster if somebody comes in with X, Y, and Z problem to say, here is the pill that will deal with that, rather than, okay, let's go back into the echelons of the past and think about, why did this occur in the first place? Most doctors and dietitians just don't simply either have the time or want to give the time to explore that, because it would take a long time, as I take the time with my clients to do and find out that journey. But if they did do that, what would happen is that the client would be far more engaged with working with you. But number two, these options like carnivore diet, or even just changing the diet from the standard American diet or standard Western diet, standard anywhere developed world diet, to be honest, would be far, far better and probably have far, far greater impact than any of these medications. And what's really sad, Chad, to be honest, is that we've got all this sort of fanfare around, for instance, GLP-1 agonists like Ozempic and Wegovy, and we're talking about how this is being heralded as like the obesity panacea. For a start, we've had over 100 years of using these sorts of drugs, and not one of them has ever solved the obesity pandemic. Let's put it that way. We've been using them since the early 20th century, and they've basically caused side effects or killed people. So even the ones when I came into practice had just been banned, like rimonabant or silbutamine and all these other drugs which cause severe problems. I don't think GLP-1 agonists are going to do that either. But it's so much easier to say to a patient, oh, here you go, don't worry, just take this. It gives 10% weight loss, which is a clinically effective outcome. But they don't tell the patient that, well, actually, you need to keep taking the drug in order to get the effects that you need. And if you come off it, then you're just going to rebound and regain everything and do irreparable damage. And even more sinister is that we're thinking about giving these things to children. I mean, I used to work in pediatric obesity management. Before I qualified as a dietitian, I actually worked in a weight management camp which had over 200 children. Some of them were candidate for surgery. You know, it was so bad. And I can tell you categorically, and you know this obviously as a father, and I'm a father myself, that the thought of even considering medication to deal with something like weight management, to me, is just unthinkable as a professional and as a father. And for these children, it was totally unnecessary as well. Just re-educating them and giving them empowerment to change their lifestyle was far better, and we got great outcomes with these children. But that to me is a scary future where we're considering drugs over diet for these sorts of problems in the future.
You were saying that it's a travesty that we are not even considering diet and lifestyle. We just go straight to medicine. And I mean, as you were saying earlier, I believe the incentive structures are for surgery procedures and medicine, because that's where the clinician, or sorry, the clinician makes money, right? Like doing the procedure.
Yes, indeed. That is exactly it. That's the incentive. The truth of the matter, Chad, is that, and I say this to all my clients as well, is you need to be picky about who you actually see as a doctor, because unfortunately a lot of the decision making that clients often have, in my experience, whether they're based in the UK or internationally, is often on basis of convenience. So it's like the nearest person in their town, they go to that doctor, or the nearest person that's been recommended. You really do have to do your research on people, and you might have to say no to people a few times, because that's the only way that things change. You've got to vote with your feet. I would not send my children or my wife to a doctor, and I've turned down many doctors, you know, because they just didn't fit the bill, to treat them and to give them the right advice and to give them the right care that they need. And I always say to my clients as well, if you don't like what I'm doing, then absolutely don't work with me. Don't feel that you need to. I'll refer you to somebody else.
I don't think a lot of, oh, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. Sorry. I don't think a lot of people realize that doctors are a spectrum of information, because we just kind of from the outside are told not to question their doctors, not to question the white lab coat, and that like every doctor you go to is going to say the same thing about every situation. So it's like, it doesn't really matter which doctor you go to. They're going to have like an objective, like cookie cutter answer almost. Not, I say cookie cutter as in like they're fed all the same information. They're educated by the same things. And so I think, yeah, we from the get-go, we're not really empowered. Even our culture is not empowered. It's our culture is to depend on the medical system. And based on what you're describing, I would say that we have a medical system. We don't have a healthcare system. We don't have people who are treating health.
I agree. At one time, it was a privilege to go and see a doctor in the very distant past, because the system was, I mean, most people don't know this, for instance, in the UK, that prior to the national healthcare system, which was only set up after World War II, prior to that, doctors used to manage very small groups of people, and people had to, you know, effectively save up a lot of the time to go and see their doctor. And before that, they would be just going to their local apothecary or chemist or somebody locally who would look after them. And I'm not always entirely sure whether people were less healthy back then than they are now, because it meant that people had to take their health into their own hands, because unless they had a broken leg and they literally needed somebody to fix it, all other aspects of their health had to be preventative in nature. So they had to do all the right things in terms of their food and their lifestyle. And I think because there is not enough of that, what you say is absolutely true, is that if you go to your doctor for preventative advice, well, you've kind of gone potentially to the wrong person, because that's not what they're there to do. They're there to fix something, and they're going to give you something to fix it with. But if you want prevention and you want to deal with chronic conditions, then you might well be very, very disappointed.
Agreed. Yeah, I believe we have outsourced too many things in life to make us dependent. We have outsourced our health. We have outsourced our understanding of nutrition. We have
Yes.
outsourced medicine. We have outsourced all these, I feel like, core aspects of who we should be. You know what I mean? I even think a lot of people outsource their spirituality, and they
Mm.
outsource religion and things like that, because it's like, oh, these people have the answer. And and I don't want to offend anybody who is religious, but I think a lot of people who go to church, and this is my opinion, are outsourcing a lot of their spirituality. And so I think I have a strong belief that we need to get back to who we are. And one of the big aspects of that is understanding health, at least to some degree, rather than just making it a side project. Like, I think
Yeah.
everybody has their career, and then their family is like a side project. Their health is a side project. And it's like they oftentimes don't have enough time for it. And then they end up, their family health isn't very strong. Their health isn't very strong. You know what I mean? And
I agree.
we kind of end up 20 years down the road, like, what happened to my family? What happened
Mm.
to my health? Like, this was a slow accumulation, but I think it all stems in the culture that you don't have the qualifications to handle your own health.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I would echo some of the sentiments you made around this. I guess the religious aspect is that I was talking recently on my own podcast to another guest, and we got onto the subject of men and male psychology. And I think what some of the things that you said there were very true, is that quite often, a lot of men are, I think, denying themselves this opportunity when it comes to health, to stand up and be the example to their family, because they're afraid of maybe what friends will think, society will think, the doctor will think, boss will think, or whatever. When actually that's our calling in many respects, I believe, as men, is to lead the way, be the example. It's not to dominate, but to lead the way, show your family that this is the way that we should be going, and this makes the most sense. And that requires you to educate yourself. It requires you to go to the right people, get the right information, and take that information, synthesize it, and do the best for your family. Because if you just sit down and wait for the government, whoever, to save you, that help is probably not going to come ever. And so, men who are listening, I urge you, for your own sake and for your family's sake, you need to start listening to what people like Chad are telling you, and have the conviction to improve yourself and improve your life and improve your family's welfare.
Yeah, you must live an observed life, whether that's religious based or whether that is spiritual based or whatever. But you must live an observed life. I feel like as a man, there's no other option. But
No.
as a person, there shouldn't be any other options. You have to look in yourself deeply and not make that a side project. Make that the primary project, and everything balances is built around that. So before I forget and we get too far off into a different subject, I really would like for you to tell us, what is the difference between a dietitian and a nutritionalist, and where they each stem from, and why they have different designations.
Okay, so it's mostly there is a legal kind of framework to this, and there's also just a historical one. In the end, it doesn't make a big difference in terms of the education, because, as I said before, you can go to one nutritionist and get amazing advice, you can go to another one and get poor advice, you can go to one dietitian and get great advice, you can go to one and get very poor advice. So it doesn't really matter, and there shouldn't really be any infighting. It should be around who's the best in terms of their knowledge. But the legal definition, certainly in the UK, and this is the case in the US as well, is that the term dietitian is a medical designation. So it's a bit like if you went around, Chad, and saying, well, I'm a doctor or an MD, you can't do that because legally that would be falsifying your position. It'd be the same as if a dietitian, you can't call yourself a dietitian unless you hold the qualification. Okay, so that's the purest difference between the two. Where it becomes a lot more gray is in the qualifications, especially in the US, because there are nutritionists who work in hospitals, whereas in the UK it tends to not really happen that way, and also in other parts of Europe and other countries as well. So then the education actually is very, very similar. So you are given the same body of information. And I used to teach both nutritionists and dietitians, so I know this to be true, that you get the same information. Where they differ then is in the individual ability of the person to treat a patient or a client. What does that mean? It means that dietitians will receive the majority of their training in a hospital. So they'll be taught to do a clinical examination, to provide a diagnosis, and to provide medical care, which may include maybe some drug therapies. Some dietitians are qualified to do that, like myself, or to refer to a different specialist. Okay. Most nutritionists don't have that level of training, although I apologize to anybody out there who does. Most do not. And also the legal framework is not there. So you, for instance, Chad, and lots of people on social media do this. They can call themselves a nutritionist tomorrow if they want, because there isn't a legal definition for it. There might be some variations, like registered nutritionist or licensed nutritionist, and it will depend on the state you're in. If it's in the US, and in the UK, it depends also on whether you're in Scotland or England or Wales. But then after that, most nutritionists will have done their training outside of a hospital. So it will be in some sort of surgery or an outpatient department or a community center. And again, that can be very variable then in terms of who they work with. So it might not be, and again, I don't want to offend anybody, but it may not be necessarily people who are on death's door, or maybe not even people who are first coming to this world, like in neonatal care or pediatrics. It might well be just free living individuals with chronic conditions, diabetes, obesity, metabolic syndrome, high blood pressure, whatever it is. And so that's the main difference. But the core of it is that there is more similarities than there are differences. There are differences maybe in the associations that they're attached to, like the American Dietitians Associations or the Nutrition Association. But really and truly, at the core of it, they've been taught very, very similar things. And you'll get dietitians who also, like myself, who have quite different viewpoints, but are equally maybe part of it, who are registered. So that's the big difference, really. And again, it comes down to the individual practitioner that you want to go and see. You need to ask them the right questions. What do you believe in? What are your interests? Who do you treat on a regular basis? Before you part with your hard-earned cash and go and see them, you should ask all these questions to them, because if they've never worked with anybody, for instance, on a carnivore diet, you might be very disappointed if you go there for optimization and then they turn around and say, well, that sounds like a crazy diet. Why would you do that?
Okay, yeah. So based on that, I feel like I should start calling myself a dietologist.
Yeah, that can work. I'd support
Yeah,
that. Nutrition scientist, I've always thought is quite a good one.
I like that, nutrition scientist, but dietologist is like the study of diets. You can't get in trouble for saying that because I study diets.
No, that's true.
I study every diet. That's maybe I'll just start doing a new term, coin a new term, a dietologist.
I love it. I love it.
Oh man, you were just saying something and it was very important to me, but I hate how legal terms start to get in there, because like, for example, if you read a book and you decide to profess that book, it would be a professor, right? Mm-hmm. But if you call yourself a professor, now it could be a legal term that gets you in trouble. So it's like there's language that all of a sudden you can't use. There's like a legal stronghold on it.
Yeah.
Right? It's very interesting. So I can't go around, if I start calling myself on this show a dietitian without knowing any better, I could be legally held accountable.
Agreed. And there are also places where there are certain responsibilities that come with that. So as I said, you can't call yourself a medical doctor without fulfilling all the obligations of that, plus the qualifications. So there will be, continuous professional development that you must commit every year. There are a certain number of points that need to be accrued, and you need to submit them to the General Medical Council, if it's the UK, or I think it's the American Physicians Association in the US. And also, it also stops you from doing certain interesting areas, for instance. So one thing that some people may not know is that when you have a legal situation, like there's medical malpractice, for instance, they might ask an expert to come in and give evidence in court. And that's one thing that I do as a dietitian. I'm one of 3 in the UK that can do that.
Wow.
And the term is an expert witness, but you can't do that as a nutritionist. You need to have medical training, and you need to have maintained that. And so that's also a fundamental difference as well, because you're giving evidence that could affect the outcome of a legal case, which could be really substantial, some of the ones that I work with. And some of them are very sad, actually, because they often involve children or mistreatment in hospitals. And so they're difficult to work with, but I'm glad to be able to contribute in some way.
Yeah, absolutely. So you said something that jarred my memory what I was going to ask you earlier. Isn't it scary that we have such a consequential field of health that is so polarized in what is correct? And what I mean by that is I studied math and physics. Pretty much until you get to theoretical physics, everyone
Yeah.
agrees.
Yes, agreed.
Like everyone agrees how to do this. Everyone agrees, oh, this is the equation for that. If we all looked at the same problem and then we went back to our labs to try to figure out like the equations for that, it's a very objective. You know what I mean? You're either going to get the right answer, or you're going to get the wrong answer.
Well, that's
Isn't
exactly
it crazy? And they have a fraction of the funding that the medical system has, that the healthcare system has. And with all these outrageous studies that we have, isn't it weird that we still don't really know what's going on?
Yeah.
And we're the ones, we public, the one they have made us all vulnerable to it and all susceptible to it. So why is it that we have such drastic viewpoints within the same field of expertise? So if you invite somebody on who's an expert witness, and all of a sudden it's just like whatever they've decided is the expertise in that field.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, it's really interesting, the point that you make, because I think the example I gave you of providing evidence to a court is actually quite poignant here, in that the information that you can provide in a case has to be, as you say, hard evidence. It has to be based on facts. The opinion part is actually very, very small when it comes to a court mandated decision. So in a sense, they're not really interested in what I think. What they're interested in is what I know and what can be verified by fact. And what they mean by that is what's in the medical, what actually happened, what's in the evidence of the medical history, and what can we then therefore say based on what we know about human physiology, and so that in my case it would be nutrition, course of disease. And so it's a much more satisfying field to work in that sense. But what you're alluding to is the global healthcare system, which is based, to be honest, on paradigms. It's based on feelings. It's based on the ebb and flow of what's politically sound at the moment, or it's popular. So at the moment, it's very popular to talk about plant-based diets. It's very popular to talk about sustainability. It's very popular to talk about diversity between individuals. But it's not based on human physiology. It's not based on fact as such. It's based on paradigms and positions. And it's funny you mentioned about physics and maths, because actually my flatmates, when I was at university in my first degree, were all physicists or mathematicians. And so they would all laugh and say, well, we're the only ones in the actual hard sciences here, and you're doing soft stuff, in biology, or at the time it's human biology, which is kind of true, really. But oddly enough, to that point, much of biology can't be explained, I think, adequately without physics, particularly
Agreed.
quantum physics, because the sort of chemical basis for life doesn't really give an adequate, answer for why do all the things that go on in the body happen at the rate at which they happen, because we can't recreate those conditions in a lab, or we can, but they take an enormous amount of man and scientific power to do, say, one enzymatic reaction, and you're doing like 100,000 every second in every cell of your body. So when you think about that, something has to be going on at a quantum biological level, which isn't adequately explained, or even it's not even taught. It's not even taught to medical practitioners, because it doesn't even start at that point. It starts way above that, at the kind of chemical level. And that, I think, is an absolute tragedy when it comes to understanding how human biology works, and also how we can fix diseases, because it then brings into question what is driving the quantum level of biological concepts. And a lot of it is, obviously, as we talk about, is related to diet and the way that we feed, for instance, the mitochondria, and which pathways we're activating. But it's also related to our environment. It's related to our exposure to sunlight. It's how close we are associated with nature.
I saw your glasses.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so I wanted to get into that here in a
Sure.
bit. But before you got into that, which we will definitely, I wanted to ask, as somebody who studies biology as a dietitian, nutritionalist, do you, because this is something that I've always kind of thought, but really started to reaffirm my ideas, is that the body is a lot more intelligent than we realize. Like, our single celled organisms aren't just like little robots. Our mitochondria aren't just like blindly doing these automated responses based off like nerve responses, but like extreme intelligence, cooperation, coordination, synergy happening at the cellular level and even the intracellular level, like within the organelles of our cells. Like, there's extreme intelligence happening at that level. And so I want, because we just kind of think it's like, oh, it's our DNA and we're the intelligent ones and we just happen to be living outside of these things. But we think of ourselves as like macroscopic to it, or separated from it.
One of the most important aspects, I believe, of explaining all life on this planet, not just human beings, is the intelligence that is unseen in some respects, and it's not cognitive, and yet it is probably the most poorly communicated area of biology, let's call it. So the quantum level, so the subatomic level is just not communicated very well. And as you say, you gave a great example there. People will say, oh, well, it's just all in the DNA. Yeah, but then you ask a very logical question that my daughter would ask, who's less than 5 years old. Well, why does that happen, Daddy? How does the DNA know what to do? And how does the RNA know what to do? And so when you get to that point, and then you get very blank faces, usually from very intelligent people, like scientists, even geneticists, can't tell you why things move and why they know where to go. I'm sorry, but probability just doesn't cut it for me. There has to be something else going on. And even if you go to, as you say, the macro end, I saw this myself thousands of times throughout my career. Well, maybe not thousands, at least a few hundred times. That's probably an overstatement. People getting better miraculously. They would just spontaneously get better. Cancers clearing up, or coming out of conditions that were seemingly they were on death's door, coming out of palliative care to normal life again. And yes, some might then want to infer, that it's God's involved, or whatever's involved, or whatever. And quite often you look in the medical notes, and the consultant would plainly write miracle, and that's it. Because they've got no other explanation for it. People have got better somehow. There's something going on at a, let's call it, coherent level, that's making the cells in the body work better and heal themselves. And I'm not talking here about mumbo jumbo and like crystal healing or whatever, although that probably there's something in that potentially. All these different alternative therapies and all these different modalities that people like to throw off as alternative point towards a level of innate intelligence in the body that has capacity to heal. And we all know this ourselves. We know this. We know the friend who somehow got better from a seemingly bad position. We know people who've had suffered trauma and somehow got themselves better, even when in the face of it they couldn't. Or I take my own life, and I think about my great grandmother who lived to 105. She literally said to everyone, I'm not dying until X, Y, and Z happens. And sure enough, against all odds, she didn't. There's something about the tenacity of existence which pushes against the background of what we can explain objectively through the scientific method. And that's when you have to get down to the quantum level and start to think about, well, what's happening here at the proton, electron level? And most people's experience with, say, maths and physics isn't always that great when it comes to their education. So at this point, they turn off and they go, oh, this is too much for me. But if you break it down, as I did, and go back to basics, it all makes sense eventually. And it has to, because as you mentioned one of the most important organelles there, the mitochondria. Well, if you look up in any biological textbook about what happens to the food, because at the end of the day, all the macronutrients, the fats, the proteins and carbs, they all eventually go into the mitochondria, because what are they turned into? Electrons. Because there's no fat, combustion engine, there's no carbohydrate combustion engine, there's an electron transport chain. And guys, you can look this up yourself if you want. It's in every biology textbook across the planet. Why? Because life works on the flow of electrons. It's like a battery, as they like to call it. But there's so much more than that, as you say. But without that flow going on at a subatomic level, life does not work. And then you have to think about, okay, how can you make that little battery work properly? And then you start to look outside the structure of the mitochondria and look at the change in protons. And we're probably now getting beyond where people have got capacity at this point. But I just wanted to just paint the picture of, unless you get down to this level, you will never be able to truly understand what is driving all life and why human beings and all life on this planet is so bloody amazing and so interesting and so fascinating to understand.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you need to get to that level, like you were saying. I think we kept getting to dangerous levels of science, and then when there's a profit to be made from science, that's when it started to influence us negatively. So it was like we learned about cholesterol.
Yeah, but again, this has a subatomic element to it as well, a quantum element to it.
It's like we got enough microscopes and technology to learn about cholesterol. And then it's like, oh, cholesterol's bad. Stop eating cholesterol. It's like they always found out enough science for the surface level and then drastically change our diet and lifestyle for the negative, like without understanding the full picture. And it's like we always find the next newest thing to create a fad in order to make money. And then legislation gets involved to continue that money making process, and then it's too late to influence law. And it's like I remember some guy got on there and was like, it was 26 years before we realized this drug was bad and made it illegal, but that's 26 years of damage. How many times are we going to do this? And there's a list of drugs that are banned that were on the market as regular things for decades, and it's just like we're going to continue to make these mistakes. But like you said, when we go down to what is life, it's a movement of subatomic particles. It's weird. We are dependent on movements of subatomic particles and these little single-celled organisms that are completely dependent on that. And so for example, my friend's dad, he had cancer, and he wasn't going to be able to heal from this cancer. And they were Mormon. And so part of his practice was fasting and praying. And he was healed. And so for him, God healed him. But like when we look, maybe, we understand the placebo. And it's like sometimes between intentionality and then allowing the intelligence, allowing your body to work, like literally getting out of your own body's way to do the healing, to do the repair. It's so intelligent and knows how to do this, but we treat our bodies like they're not intelligent beings. You know what I mean? Like it doesn't know how to do the healing.
I think the two can definitely work together. I don't think you necessarily have to choose science over religion. I think there is room for the two to work together, and they did coexist for an awfully long period of time, many thousands of years, before we decided, oh, no, we're not going to be friends anymore, and that's it. But I had this conversation with Carrie Bennett, who's also a very excellent biologist and quantum health educator, and we talked about the kind of, I guess, the nature of the divine God, whatever you want to call it, and how that might be explained at a quantum level for things like healing. And in many respects, what you've just said, with your friend, with the praying and is you're creating coherence. Whenever you do anything for somebody that creates coherence, and that might be just giving them a hug, making them feel safe, reducing inflammation either through something like fasting, putting them on the right diet, getting them back into nature. When you look down at a microscopic level, for instance, you look at their red blood cells, you'll see that even they will flow more freely together. There won't be as much viscosity, there won't be as much chaos. And why is that? It's because of this nature of coherence. So at a subatomic level, all the cells are, for the purposes of this conversation, are working better just by simply being in its more natural state. And it isn't absolutely outside the realms of logic to think that, and again, this has been proven times and times and times again in clinical research, people who meditate and do yoga and all these things, they heal faster. Why? Because of this, because they're putting their body into a state of coherence where everything is working better. And you can create coherence. You don't have to go to a church or whatever, but just expressing gratefulness or moving away from negative thoughts and feelings, dealing with mental health issues and trauma, can help to move your body towards a larger proportion of your day being in a state of coherence. And people do this all the time. You see all sorts of stuff online where people are listening to binaural beats and or they're meditating or they're doing other practices. Even things like cold therapy, for instance, puts your body into a better state of coherence at a subatomic level. So all these different biohacking modalities are all trending your body towards greater coherence with you. So it doesn't really matter what you do in that sense. And you can go to a church, or you can go to your synagogue, or your or wherever it's your temple, or whatever it is that you're doing. Human beings are meant to be in a state of coherence. They're meant to deal with trauma. And if we look at this historically, we lived in small tribes, and all the men, for instance, yes, they went out and they hunted and they got their pent up aggression out, and they felt the sense of achievement from bringing back a kill to the tribe. And then they would talk about it, and they would talk about what they're going to do next time. And if they had worries, they would share them with their fellow men. And we see this all the time, again, in the research when we look at, say, indigenous populations of Africa, the Hadza tribe, or the Catawans, or the Maasai. There's this sense of duty and community, which helps with the mental health of men in these communities. And as a consequence, it's not really any surprise. And again, diet does play a role here, of course, and being outside does play a role here. But it's no surprise that the rates of depression, suicidality, or kind of very, very adverse mental health problems are much lower in these populations. And it's not just because they don't have stress, as it were, because we'd love to throw that term around and say, oh, well, it's the modern stressful society. Well, imagine not being able to eat every day unless you went out and hunted down what you have to hunt down. That's pretty stressful. But the difference is how people deal with it. Whereas these days, we love to throw our stress into our tablets and our smartphones. We don't talk to anybody about it. Well, certainly men often struggle to do that. And we find unhelpful behaviors to deal with it. So men, for instance, if we're sticking with that topic, it's what I see with my male clients. It's porn addiction, it's alcohol, it's drugs, it's illicit relations, it's getting aggressive in an unhelpful way with colleagues, friends, family, whatever it is, and not channeling that into something else that can help them as men. And I think if they really understood this, and this is what I go to great lengths to explain them to, if they put that effort and that energy into other practices, you don't have to become a monk. No one's asking you to do that, but we just change the way that you view life and how you're going to cope with it. That can make a massive impact on all of this. And it's all, as I said, it's rooted in that subatomic framework, which we've had for a long, long time, let's call it.
Well, I completely agree. As a matter of fact, everything you're saying makes perfect sense, and it's in alignment with my beliefs on this topic. And that's why Strangles is one of my pillars, steak, strangles, and stoicism. Here,
Yes.
Let me change this right here. So that's
Exactly.
and that's our meat. That's our meat background. But
Beautiful.
we have steak, strangles, and stoicism, right? And strangles right here is Brazilian Jiu Jitsu.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that it's so important for veterans, but also for men to be part of a community, to
Yes.
find a community where you bleed, sweat, cry, you know what I mean? Everything together, you grow together. Everybody starts off as an idiot. Like no one walks into the grappling community good at grappling. Everybody sucks. So like everybody has to earn their way up. Everybody's in a hierarchy. So you know exactly where everybody's is, and they've earned that place through trial, through conquest. You know what I mean? Like you
Absolutely.
had to win this many times and earn your spot here. There's no spots that are just given away.
No.
You know, the leader is a clear leader and he gets to speak because he earned his way there. Everybody knows that guy is the most badass guy in the room. You know what I mean? And he's made that happen, and he deserves to speak. And no one has any issues with that. There's, you know what I mean? It's very cool. So I think it's cool that's one of the closest places you can get to build that camaraderie, to build a level of trust, like an iron sharpens iron type deal, where like you make me better by trying to hurt me. You know what I mean? And we have that sort of relationship, and you earn your way up slowly. It takes decades, you know, to even start thinking about becoming a black belt. It's not like Taekwondo where you can get your black belt in like a couple years or something. This takes a long time. And so anyway, I think that a sense of community, a sense of building together, a sense of knowing what you've been through, isolation and exclusivity is very important for men, especially to have. And what's cool on top of that is they're not only satisfying the community aspect, they're also satisfying a lot of what's happening in the brain, in terms of like, for example, if you have PTSD, it allows you to start getting, you know, like it starts repairing those processes that send you. And this is why I'm on this subject. You talked about how we are designed to deal with traumas. Traumas are not a life sentence or a death sentence. Like we are designed to grow from traumas. We are designed to build and like thrive from traumas. And we're not dealing them with those really well. Where I think that something like what you go back to your cohesive nature, your ancestral duty, which is like you deal with hard stuff and then you transfer it to the thing that makes you stronger. I think jiu-jitsu helps that. So people who have PTSD from like combat or, you know, getting blown up or whatever, it's like they can go back and simulate that combat and tell their bodies that they're going to be okay in a safe environment back with your community. And you do that enough times and you're transferring enough of that information from the fight or flight over to the like prefrontal cortex in order to deal with that. And then the stakes is we need to make sure we're in such a machine in which that is being allowed to happen. Those natural processes are even allowed to happen. And so I really like what you were saying about that sense of community, that sense of being together, that sense of going through trauma. And when we look at our ancestors, man, like for them just to get, like you said, a parcel of food, they had to risk their lives. You know what I mean? And that would be a trauma response for any sort of Gen Z right now. For them to live one day as their ancestors, they wouldn't make it. They would be scarred forever. And so if you want to talk about stress, I think that we conflate a lot of little stressors into big stressors because we don't have a lot of legitimate stressors in our life. That puts you in a state of stress. And when your body's in a state of stress, it doesn't go into proper healing. It goes into these constant fight or flight responses and inflammation. So a lot of what you just said right there really resonated with me all the way from the macroscopic to the microscopic level. And I greatly appreciate that. I know we only have 10 minutes left. So I want to prelude all this last 10 minutes to say that if you were to deal with somebody, or if you have dealt with somebody who is a combat veteran and they've been dealing with a multitude of physical, mental, emotional, spiritual symptoms from this PTSD, and they just like, I'm broken, so I need medicine and blah, blah, blah. What would your diagnosis be, or not even diagnosis, what would your prescription be as a registered dietitian for somebody in this situation? And can I get a holistic view of it? What would your, I guess, holistic, like,
probably my strategy.
Strategy is a great, approach. There we go. That was where it's looking. What would you be your approach from A to, I like that you say Z, right? A to Z, in order to get this person at least on the right track to living a optimal lifestyle rather than a degrading lifestyle?
Okay, so let's start with the A then. We'll see if we can find out come with a Z. But it would be some sort of animal-based diet, whether that's carnivore or a variation of. The reason being is that it's the most, if this individual has got, weight or metabolic issues, and we know that there's a high metabolic component, metabolic dysfunctional component, let's call it, with most mental health conditions that I've certainly experienced in my career. And I'm not a psychiatrist or a mental health professional, but from what I've seen, most have benefited from an animal-based diet or a variation of, like a ketogenic diet or keto carnivore approach, somewhere where we're removing the processed nonsense. We're getting back to a whole foods diet, and we're pushing animal-based foods back into the diet to get that solid nutrition foundation. Foods that your body recognizes and absorbs effectively from a biochemical level, okay? So that's the first thing I would be saying to them. You need to get off whatever other stuff you're doing and give yourself a period of time where you're just getting these foods in and you're giving body what it needs to nourish itself properly. So that's the first thing. Then I would add in an environmental aspect. You've put it quite eloquently, which is get yourself into a community, whether that's a talking therapy group, a community of other men that can support you, assuming we're talking about a man here, men that can support you with your healing journey and hold you accountable, whether that's myself holding them accountable, you holding them accountable, but you need other men to hold you accountable to your treatment journey, and also to be able to, give you a bit of a booster when things don't go right, because we love to think that everything's going to go swiftly from day one, but it's really not. We know that there's going to be a couple of 2 steps backwards and 1 step forward. So we need men at our side that we can trust to hold us accountable for that. And then the next thing I would say is your environment. You talked about trauma, but I think some of the environments that certainly some of the men that come in with post-traumatic stress disorder, of which at our hospital we're very privileged to actually have a veteran centre that we serve as part of the British Armed Forces. A lot of them are in a toxic environment, let's call it, if we want to use a very, very politically jarring word. They're either in an environment where they've got friends around them who are not serving them on their healing journey, maybe a family environment that's not serving them well, or they're not serving their family and stepping up to change the way that they approach things in their household in order to get better. And that might be something as simple as changing the way that you approach time together with your peer group or your family. So for instance, if most of your time is spent inside, glued to tablets, devices, screens, and not outside embracing nature as it's intended, being in natural sunlight, getting your feet on the bare earth, doing primal activities, I'm going to sound dreadfully old-fashioned here, but maybe gardening or building something or whatever, but things that men are meant to be doing with their bodies, then you really need to rethink that. And that might be to start with very basics, go for a walk rather than sitting at home watching a movie. Do these basic things, because put it this way, chaps, your children are watching you and they're absorbing everything that you're doing. And if you're not leading by example, or we had made a joke there about Gen Z, but imagine like Gen Alpha and Gen Y and I and whatever it is, the babies, what are they going to be doing when they're surrounded with even more tech, and more labor-saving devices and less opportunity to be out in the toxic sunlight? Obviously, it's not toxic. Stay inside, it's safe, or whatever it is. If they've been given that good grounding by their dad and their mum, then there's a chance that they might make it through. So that's that as well. So you've got to think about your environment as well. And then you need to then layer on other ways that you can physically empower yourself as well. So that might be giving back to your community. It might be joining a religious group. It might be going on retreats. It might be joining a martial arts group. I'm also a martial artist for 25 years, and so I know the benefits that they had on my childhood and my upbringing and dealing with, my own demons, as they say. Doing something that pushes you to step outside the norm and get on that healing journey is absolutely powerful. And look, I'm going to put at the end medication, because I'm not anti-medication. What I am is appropriate use of medication. And absolutely, if somebody was suicidal, then it might be that they need to use something for a period of time to stop that. But this goes back to our earlier conversation around choosing your practitioners wisely and understanding the prognosis for your recovery. So if you're working with a practitioner who is on your team, they should be saying, okay, we're using this now to get you from point A to point B, whatever that looks like. And then we're going to have a conversation about changing that dosage, and hopefully you're coming off that as well at some point in the future. Not here's your prescription for, Zoloft or Prozac or whatever it is, and I'll see you in 10 years or never, as I've sometimes witnessed. That's not good medical practice. That's very poor medical practice. That's basically drug pushing onto people. And hopefully any doctors who are listening in would agree that patients need to have very regular reviews when it comes to their medication. So I'm not anti-medication. What I am is anti-inappropriate medication use with patients.
All right, I like that answer. I tell people, and you give me a little bit of feedback on this before we close up. I always tell people should satisfy the mind, body, and the soul. And what I mean by that is to make it less elusive is do something every single day that satisfies the animal in you, meaning that you still have, millions of years of animal DNA in you, and you can't get away from it. Our human part of our brain is built on the animal part of our brain. Our human genetics are built on the animal. So make sure, like what you're doing, you're eating a proper species diet, like a species appropriate diet. You're moving, right? You're doing something that is allowing these different chemicals to be released in order for appropriate dopamine release and things like that. 2, do something that makes you uniquely human in terms of what can you do as a human that other animals can't, such as martial arts, such as music, such as language, such as something. Do something that that satisfies the human part of your brain, to learn and solve puzzles and, grow in that sense. And then do something that makes you humanly unique. Out of all the humans in the world, what is something that makes you completely individualistic, and give that back to humanity and give that to the world? Okay. And as long as you're slowly growing in all three of those aspects, you generally keep your body in a state of equilibrium and homeostasis. And you know what I mean? And so, like, for me, I like to do stake strangles and stoicism to make sure that our body is set up. Jiu Jitsu is a martial art. Other animals don't really do martial arts the way it's a philosophy, right? And then stoicism is a practical life philosophy that develops your own way of thinking, your own critical thought. And it makes it just makes you individual. And so, anywho, that's kind of like my approach to it. Like, if you had to break it down, would you agree or like have a little bit of difference there?
I think it's an excellent trinity. And I think you can't get much better than that, to be honest, Chad. I completely agree with you.
All right. Thank you so much, Rick. Seriously, this was one of the best conversations I've ever had. You're extremely intelligent and intellectual on this topic. I hope to stay in touch with you as time goes on. Maybe you come back on the show in the future. Maybe I can come on your show in the future. Yeah. Okay, perfect. Thank you so much. I'm going to go ahead and end it here. Do you have any promotions or anything before we leave?
No promotions at all. I'll send you all the handles and whatever for your description for YouTube, and let me know when it's ready to go live. And absolutely, let's find a date to come on to my YouTube as well. Maybe we can dive into more of the quantum physics and
I would love to.
Sort of stuff. Yeah, that would be cool. That would be really cool.
All right. Thank you so much, Rick. Have a great rest of your day. And if you're listening, remember, don't do drugs and don't eat vegetables, guys. See you on the next one.